I'd like to thank Udi Urman, Dr. Smedar Sheffi, the curator of the project that we'll be discussing this evening, the Marlene Meyerson JCC, and I'd also like to thank Francine Hunter McGivern for her love and support throughout this project. So I'm an artist and writer, and I make floating sculptures that will, that are currently part of an installation at the Center for Contemporary Art in Ramle, or project of the Center for Contemporary Art in the Pool of the Arches, which is a 9th century underground cistern, an archaeological site in Ramle, Israel. And I'd like to, today we're going to be screening some films, and the screening will be followed by discussion. We're joined by some very distinguished panelists who are also wonderful poets and participants in the project. I'm here with Richard Milazzo, distinguished art writer and poet, and Carter Ratcliff, distinguished art writer and poet, coming to us remotely. So this is a great honor, and I'm sure we'll have a lively conversation after the film screening. Let me give you a little bit of background on the project. So during COVID, we were all locked at home, and I was imagining the ideal environment for my floating sculptures, and I was going online and aspiring to travel and install these works in a very different environment. And I happened upon the Pool of the Arches, this beautiful 9th century cistern that was built by the Umayyad Caliphate for watering farm animals. It's an underground cistern with these beautiful vaulted arches in stone with oculi that allow light to kind of shine down into the water. These shafts of light are always changing their position. The water always assumes a different kind of character over the course of the day. And it's withstood the centuries. It withstood an earthquake that leveled the entire town. Napoleon's troops, marched through Ramle and left, and this kind of this extraordinary architectural space has remained intact. So basically, the project, I developed this idea with Dr. Smedar Sheffi, the founder and chief curator of the Center for Contemporary Art in Ramle. And we wanted to do an installation of the floating sculptures, and we also wanted to accompany that installation with readings by poets that would, of their poetry that would be cross-translated between English, Arabic, and Hebrew. We are very honored that Richard Milazzo and Carter Ratcliff both wrote poems specifically for this project. In Israel, we have two Middle Eastern poets, Agi Mishol and Marwa Sabni, who read poetry in Hebrew and Arabic. So I think you're in for a treat. We're going to project a series of short films. The whole cycle runs about 26 minutes. And then Richard and I are going to come back to the podium, and we'll have a conversation and entertain questions. And so I hope you enjoy the films. Thank you. Thank you.
Godi, Fiorenza, poi che sei sì grande, che per mare e per terra batti l'ali, e per l'inferno tuo nome si spande. Tra li ladron trovai 5 cotali tuoi cittadini, onde mi ven vergogna, e tu in grande orranza non ne sali. Ma se presso al mattin del ver si sogna, tu sentirai di qua da picciol tempo di quel che prato non ch'altri t'agogna. E se già fosse non saria per tempo, così fossei da che pur esser dee, che più mi graverà con più a tempo. Noi ci partimmo, e su per le scalee che n'avea fatto i borni a scender pria, rimontò il duca mio e trasse me, e proseguendo la solinga via tra le schegge e tra rocchi dello scoglio, lo pie San Salaman non si spedia. Allor mi dolsi e ora mi ridoglio, quando drizzo la mente a ciò ch'io vidi, e più longegno a freno chi non soglio, perché non corra che virtù nol guidi. Sì che se stella bona o miglior cosa m'ha dato il ben, ch'io stessi non m'invidi. Quante il villan ch'al poggio si riposa nel tempo che colui che il mondo schiara, la faccia sua a noi tien meno ascosa, come la mosca cede alla zanzara, vede lucciole giù per la vallea, forse colà dove vendemmia e ara, di tante fiamme tutta risplendea l'ottava bolgia, sicch'io m'accorsi, tosto che fui lave il fondo parea. E qual colui che si vengiò con gli orsi vide il carro d'Elia al dipartire, quando i cavalli al cielo erti levorsi, che nol potea sì con gli occhi seguire che il vedesse altro che la fiamma sola, sì come nuvoletta in su salire, tal si muove ciascuna per la gola del fosso, che nessuna mostra il furto e ogni fiamma un peccatore invola. Io stava sopra al ponte a veder surto, sì che s'io non avessi un ronchion preso, caduto sarei giù senz'esser urto. E il duca, che mi vide tanto atteso, disse: dentro dai fuochi son di spirti, catun si fascia di quel ch'elli è inceso. Maestro mio, risposi io, per udirti son io più certo, ma già m'era avviso che così fosse, e già voleva dirti: chi è in quel foco che vien sì diviso di sopra, che par surger della pira dove Teocle col fratel fu miso? Rispose a me: là dentro si martira Ulisse e Diomede, e così insieme alla vendetta vanno come a l'ira, e dentro dalla lor fiamma si geme l'agguato del caval che fe la porta onde uscì de Romani il gentil seme. Piangevi si entro l'arte, perché morta dei da mia ancor si duol d'Achille, e del Palladio pena vi si porta. Sei posson dentro da quelle faville parlar, diss'io, maestro, assai ten priego e ripriego, che il priego valga 1000, che non mi facci dell'attender niego, finché la fiamma cornuta qua vegna, vedi che del disio ver lei mi piego. Ed egli a me: la tua preghiera è degna di molta loda, e io però l'accetto, ma fa che la tua lingua si sostegna, lascia parlare a me, ch'io ho concetto ciò che tu vuoi, che ei sarebbero schivi, perché fuor greci, forse, del tuo detto. Poi che la fiamma fu venuta quivi dove parve al mio duca tempo e loco, in questa forma lui parlare audivi: o voi che siete due dentro ad un foco, s'io meritai di voi mentre ch'io vissi, s'io meritai di voi assai o poco, quando nel mondo gli alti versi scrissi. Non vi movete, ma l'un di voi dica dove per lui perduto a morir gissi. Lo maggior corno della fiamma antica cominciò a crollarsi, mormorando, pur come quella cui vento affatica, indi la cima qua e là menando, come fosse la lingua che parlasse, gittò voce di fuori e disse: quando mi dipartì da Circe, che sottrasse me più d'un anno là presso a Gaeta, prima che si Enea la nomasse, né dolcezza di figlio, né la pietà del vecchio padre, né il debito amore, lo qual dovea Penelope far lieta, vincer potero dentro a me l'ardore chi ebbi a divenir del mondo esperto e dei vizi umani e del valore, ma misi me per l'alto mare aperto, sol con un legno e con quella compagna picciola dalla qual non fui diserto. L'un lito e l'altro vidi infin la Spagna, fin nel Morrocco e l'isola di Sardi e l'altre che quel mare intorno bagna. Io e compagni eravam vecchi e tardi quando venimmo a quella foce stretta dove Ercole segnò i suoi riguardi a ciò che l'uom più oltre non si metta. Dalla man destra mi lasciai Sibilia, dall'altra già m'avea lasciata Setta. «Oh, frati», dissi, «che per 100 miglia perilli siete giunti all'Occidente, a questa tanto picciola vigilia di nostri sensi che è del rimanente, non vogliate negar l'esperienza di retro al sol del mondo senza gente. Considerate la vostra semenza, fatti non foste a viver come bruti, ma per seguir virtute e canoscenza». Li miei compagni fec'io sì aguti con questa orazione picciola al cammino che appena poscia li avrei ritenuti, e volta nostra poppa nel mattino de remi facemmo ali al folle volo, sempre acquistando dal lato mancino. Tutte le stelle già dell'altro polo vedea la notte, e il nostro tanto basso che non surgea fuor del marin suolo. 5 volte era acceso e tante casso lo lume era di sotto dalla luna, poi che entrati eravam nell'alto passo, quando n'apparve una montagna bruna per la distanza e parvemi alta tanto quanto veduta non avea alcuna. Noi ci allegrammo e tosto tornò in pianto che della nuova terra un turbo nacque e percosse del legno il primo canto. 3 volte il fe girar con tutte l'acque, alla quarta levar la poppa in suso e la prora ire in giù, come altrui piacque, infin che il mar fu sovra noi richiuso.
השחיינים. זקנות מן הדיור המוגן באות בדיוק ב10 לשחות. לאט הן משקיעות את גופן בתוך המים, ואז צפות שם על פני מסלולי השחייה, ורק עיניהן נוצצות מתחת לכובעי הגומי הוורודים. מפעם לפעם הן מתהפכות על גבן ומפרפרות כטובעות במובן הרחב יותר, ועבריהן שהתמזגו כבר זה בזה, עד שאין הם ראויים עוד לשמם, מבצבצים פה ושם מן האדוות, כאילו ויתר שם מישהו על זוטות כגון אלה. אך אנו, השחיינים האמיתיים, הקוראים את המים, שגופנו השחומים מבריקים בשמש, ושרירינו חוגגים את התנועה, אנו המגיחים ממעמקים, ובריאות מלאות צוללים שוב לתוכם, מתקשים להתגבר על הנעתנו הכמוסה, לחלוף כחץ על פניהן, וכלאחר יד של חן, להתיז עליהן את משובת נעורנו. ואין בנו חמלה למתחזים. להפך, ברמזים דקים אנו מסלקים אותן למקומן הראוי, שהוא בשום אופן לא כאן בינינו, השוחים, בלי כל עניין לחזות, דווקא עכשיו, בתכלית אליה אנו חותרים. מסריטים אותי. הקליפ הוא שעליי לפסוע לתוך האוקיינוס בעקבות אהובי שהפליג למרחקים. כשתיפרס שמלתי האדומה על פני המים, כפעמון שאני אנבלו, אצלול למצולות ויוקרן עליי פין.
إلى سحابة. أنا الأرض، أنا الأرض، لا تحرميني المطر. أنا كل ما ظل منها إذا ما زرعت جبيني شجر، وحولت شعري كروما وقمحا ووردا لكي تعرفيني، فجودي مطر. أنا يا سحابة عمري جبال الجليل، أنا صدر حيفا وجبهة يافا، فلا تهمسي مستحيل. ألا تسمعين خطى طفلي القادمة على عتبات فؤادك؟ ألا تبصرين عروق جبيني تحاول لثم شفاهك؟ أنا في انتظارك، أنا في انتظارك. أصبح شعري ترابا وصار حقولا، وأصبح قمحا وأضحى شجر. أنا كل ما ظل من أرضنا، أنا كل ما ظل مما عشقت، فجودي وجودي وجودي مطر.
The Architecture of Water for Daniel Rothbart. Its beams are tides, shifting but reliable. Its doors are currents, thresholds are reefs, and the occasional shipwreck. Water's windows are patches of glare at midday. Their transparency is purple at dusk and foamy white at dawn. Water's thoughts are its hallways, strangely uncluttered. Its stairwells are deep rays of light, zigzagging at steep angles. Wide open to the sun and the rain and the starlit darkness, the starless darkness, water has no roof. Water has no regrets. Nor did Theseus, having slain the Minotaur and left him for dead, for the Minotaur lives in memory. Unlike the water we would love to inhabit but cannot, for we can never memorize it. Even the fish cannot memorize it. Nonetheless, the water is alive. Having left the slain Minotaur on the island of Crete, Theseus sailed away in a ship in need of repairs. So many repairs that soon he had replaced all its parts, and so it was not the same ship. Or was it? Water doesn't care, for it is always the same, always immersing the same portion of the globe, always comprising the same portion of our bodies. Myth insists that Theseus was sailing to Delos and one day arrived, but in the real world, sustained by water, his ship is always mid-voyage. Half its parts replaced, 3/4 replaced, then all of them replaced, and so the voyage continues in the self-same ship, in a thoroughly different ship that takes its mutability from water, is endlessly generous. Water gives its mutability to everything, truly everything, even us.
So here we are. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting. Thank you for inviting me to this event that will be presented in Israel. Here we are at the Gowanus Canal, known for its toxic disposition. I'm going to read a poem called Drowning Our Sorrows, and what could be more appropriate than to have it be filmed here near the Gowanus Canal, probably one of the most toxic bodies of water in the United States, if not the world. I'm very proud to be associated with it, since I have such a pessimistic point of view. Will things get any better? No, I think they'll get worse. So let me read the poem, finally. Drowning Our Sorrows. So here's the thing, Daniel. Although I'm never quite sure what the thing is in your work, I have, pathetically speaking, tried to drown my sorrows. And I suspect you have too. And more significantly, the sorrows of the world in various bodies of water. In the last decade or so, in my case, in the Yellow Sea and the Sea of Japan. And with your helping hand, in the Hudson River, and you in the Bay of Naples. But for some reason, the source of the sorrow keeps floating back to the surface in dreams of aluminum and glass sculptures, so light, so enigmatic. Sometimes they seem to resemble a caress, or one soul whispering to another in the night, in the darkest cavern, in Hokusai's most tumultuous wave off the coast of Kanagawa, or in the wind. Fear not, we are indeed a cruel and brutal species, but occasionally a hand, or even a tree branch, a limb of some kind resembling those in your work, Daniel, will reach out and attempt to allay the sufferings. And sometimes, rare as it is, may even reach into our hearts, whatever paltry parts of those survive. No, or rather, yes, I have tried to drown my sorrows and those of others in these pitiful lines. But I have never succeeded, full of anger as I am, and resentment, and despise of my so-called enemies. Not as you have, you who have proceeded without even the semblance of irony, nor any threatening gesture, a harsh word or caustic note, an ugliness of some kind, but instead have offered the world to the world, this orb so passionate and sometimes on fire, this world floating in air, crawling along the earth, and sometimes dumbly waving back at us from the sea. Yes, I know. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. But these black branches lost in the plum blossom tree, these awkward and untoward, even unseemly limbs, glistening on the lake and on the rivers and bays and sea, even on this canal. These fragments we have shored against our ruins. They must count for something, mustn't they, Daniel? You who were captive in Babylon, you who were thrown into the lion's den, you who will survive these ignominious verses.
I neglected to describe another collaboration. That was the Canto of Ulysses. I worked with Italian actor Carlo Giuliano. We collaborated on that short film of the 26th canto of Dante's Inferno, which was also a chapter in Primo Levi's survival at Auschwitz. When he was in the concentration camp, he he kept reciting Dante in his mind as a way to kind of keep his sanity and, harken back to, his own Italian culture. And he tried to teach it to a fellow prisoner, Jean. And he had difficulty, conveying a sense of the language to someone else. But of course, it represents Dante's last voyage. It was an invention of Dante. Ulysses was tired of being holed up in Ithaca, and he rallied his crew and went off on a final voyage. And at the end of the world, this whirlpool spins out and carries the ship, underwater, and he winds up in the underworld. So, an intertextual poem that I had been working on, prior to arriving in Israel. So, anyway.
So, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my own little introduction for Daniel to kind of situate him and his work, if you'll permit me for 5 minutes. Daniel had an art school education at RISD, which is one of the foremost art schools in the U.S. I find that aspect of his education dismal. But he also went on to Columbia. And the reason why I say dismal is because so many artists, think that their art school education is the thing to do, be it RISD or Cal Arts or whatever. But they never go on to actually get a well-rounded education. And Daniel strikes me as one of the most, not only a very brilliant person, but really well-educated and extremely self-educated, and continues on that journey. So I wanted to mention that. Also, he's written 3 books. The first one was about the influence of Jewish culture on the abstract expressionists, American abstract expressionists, and I find that incredibly important book because, especially right now, considering that many people don't really put American abstract expressionist artists in the right context, they should think about these artists as refugees from the Second World War who came to the United States after not only the Holocaust, but Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they went on to make art that actually reflected those experiences. And they were basically hiding out here in the US, where it was, at that time, safe to hide out. And Daniel, being the brilliant individual that he is, really thought, I should write something about that. That's important. A second book was an anthology, which was also important, called The Story of the Phoenix. And again, even the title alone tells you how interested Daniel is of things rising from the ashes and somehow rising up. And the third one is a book called Seeing Naples. And at the time you had a MacArthur or?
No, Fulbright grant
Fulbright.
in Italy.
Fulbright. And the reason why this book is so significant is because he originally presented it to me to see if I could find him a publisher. And it was so good, I showed it to Joy Glass, who's in the audience. We both published books along with Howard Johnson. And we said, oh no, we have to publish this book. And one of the things that interested me about the book was that it seemed so Walter Benjamin-ish. And I think that, in the art world, Walter Benjamin has a certain kind of clout. But that's not why I was interested in it. I was interested in it because of the way he was writing, and kind of in these short, brief chapters, and they had a kind of real reach, cultural reach, just like Walter Benjamin, and seemed kind of non-ideological and yet very, very smart about history. And that's the one thing that Daniel does very well, is he seems to incorporate history into his work so well. And then I guess that's what I wanted to say about Daniel personally. I think we could possibly have a conversation. Yeah.
Certainly. Well, it was one of the greatest honors of my life to work with Richard, who, in addition to being a brilliant poet and art writer, I really have difficulty even finding words to express the love for both language and the written word and its physical embodiment in the book. A love of type and paper and varnish and every aspect of book making and design.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Joan Bankemper's in the audience also. She did a book with Joy and me, and her book is a book about her years working with Sal Scarpita, a great American artist, much overlooked. a brilliant artist who showed with Leo Castelli his whole career. And Joan wrote a really amazing book on not only the professional or objective side of Sal's work, but about the subjective, giving subjective insight into Sal Scarpita's mind, which, believe me, was a forbidding place. So we have another author in the audience. I interrupted you, Daniel. And we want to get Carter involved in this, don't we?
Absolutely. Would you like to say something about your remarkable poem or the installation, your participation in the project?
Can you hear us, Carter?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sam, is it possible to? Yeah, it'll just be a moment. But while we're waiting, maybe I could read one of my favorite passages ever written about my floating sculptures by Richard Milazzo. This was written on the occasion of an installation in the Hudson River. It's very brief, but I'd love to read it. Your sculptures look like strangely inspired solar outcasts, sublime or sublimated space junk, and I mean that kindly. One of them looks like an umbrella beckoning to an apocalyptic monsoon. Another, a three-headed mythic creature that has veered off its cosmic course and seems to be soaking in the peace and quiet of this watery cul-de-sac. And still others, a necklace of emeralds, or are those glowing nuggets of plutonium, searching for the throat of a Beatrice, or several starry constellations that simply mistook a black hole for a distant sun, but were unfortunately, like Daedalus and Icarus, hurtled back to this watery grave, not unlike the metaphysical entities relentlessly abandoned in Valerie's poem, Cemetery by the Sea. And that's in a forthcoming book that Richard and I are doing, titled More
Fugitive Than Light.
More Fugitive Than Light.
Carter, are you ready? Do you want to?
I'm here. Oh, hi. Hello. Well, first I'd like to thank Daniel for inviting me to participate in this project, which was literally inspiring. The idea of my poem, The Architecture of Water. I've never visited the cistern in Ramle, but all the images of it, which put this extraordinarily elegant and stable architecture. You mentioned all the disasters that this architecture has outlived, in juxtaposition with water, which is always flowing. I think, I didn't really think about it consciously until just now, but I think that juxtaposition is what inspired the notion of writing about the architecture of water, which of course in a rational way makes no sense at all. But it occurred to me, and it probably has something to do with the flowing quality of Daniel's sculpture too, the way, not just that its forms are sinuous, but that as you watch them, or I say watch them, as you view them, they accrue meanings, and the meanings shift and they change and they become richer as you watch. And so that led me to this conceit, this poetic conceit that architecture might have, might have an architecture. And so what I wrote was just sort of riffing on that idea of finding images in water that might connect in some way with water, which is fluid, which is filled with contingencies, which is always changing, the connection that it would have, or might have in the imagination with architecture. And the larger idea is that everything is fluid, even things that in our time span seem stable are changing and will not be there forever. So that there are different scales or different tempos of fluidity. But my poem suggests that not only is water fluid, but that architecture too has its fluidity. And then there's that catchphrase, I think it's Goethe, who said that architecture is frozen music, music being like poetry, being a temporal art. And in that image, you get another way of connecting the seeming stability of architecture with the constant change of music or, by extension, poetry. But that ultimately it's all connected. And you have that feeling of connection. Well, let me come at it from the other angle. Daniel's sculpture sort of initiates or inspires that feeling of connection, that feeling of all things being fluid and ultimately one. There's a kind of universality. They're very peculiar and particular shapes, but they also have a kind of basic, they invoke a kind of basic life form or various basic forms of life. And I think that's why they go so well in water, because presumably that's the origin of life on Earth, from water. And it's as if his sculptures have emerged from water to solidify so that we can see them.
Thank you.
Shall I
Please.
bring you into this? Okay.
Please.
A couple of things. All the sculptures seem to be based, they seem capable of handling water, just as Carter Ratcliff says, for deeper metaphysical reasons, but they also seem to reach up. They have limbs, they have arms. So can you comment about how you synthesize this idea of this pull downwards and this going upwards? And also, as a second question, if you can remember it, I certainly won't be able to. Oftentimes your sculpture is not talked about in the context of fine art. Me, when I look at these sculptures, I think of Miro, and I think of Tingley, and so in all the things of yours that I've read, and I think I've read most of them, I don't think anybody references fine art, and I don't understand that. So if you could answer the first question and then go to the second.
Certainly. Well, it's true. Some of the floating works do have a vertical orientation. Others really kind of float on the water. They're more they're closer to the water. Others are cantilevered upward, and I find. Maybe I should say a little something about the origin of some of the materials that I use also in the sculptures. I grew up on the west coast of the United States in Oregon, and from time to time these glass spheres would wash up on our shores. They were blown glass from the Japanese fisheries, so they contained Japanese air. They were originally used to support heavy fishing nets. Sometimes they would kind of be washed, away from their nets, and they would just float
across the ocean.
Across the ocean,
which is an amazing journey,
amazing storms at sea, and pack ice and currents, and they might spend decades in the ocean, and then they kind of they would wash up on our shore. So I was invited many years ago to do a project in Venice, and I was thinking of the glassmaking traditions of Venice, and also the idea of using one of these this found glass as the armature for a sculpture that could float in the water, and then I think I really enjoyed working with. Those original forms were closer to the water. They would kind of lie supine on the water and assume the form of
an odalisque.
Of an odalisque, an unusual odalisque in the water. But then I started to think about how you might cantilever some of these sculptures by using counterweights to actually have them become more vertical and expansive, and that became intriguing also because the movement was entirely different. But I really like the way that these works are predicated on the the kind of chance circumstances of the weather and the and the water, and what watercraft or what kind of floating fallen trees, what have you. Anything kind of activates the sculptures and in a new and different way. And it's true, they kind of, you referred to the space junk, and some people
They look like satellites sometimes.
Satellites or
So
science fiction.
That's a kind of reaching up, right?
Yeah, but also, I mean, I think it's true. They also refer to marine life in some way, or to dragonflies, or but not entirely. They seem foreign to a body of water. They're made out of aluminum and glass. These are industrial materials, and they have organic shapes that are kind of that suggest nature, but they're also very foreign. And I like the idea of when you position them, when you put them in water, they're not entirely at their ease in that element, and they seem like something that was an outcast, something that was made by man, and that somehow helps you kind of reframe your perception of a waterway. I actually did a project in the Gowanus Canal. It was with a floating sculpture and choreography for 2 canoes, and it was about re-enchantment and kind of taking this terribly dejected, abused waterway and reframing the viewer's perception.
You mean the place where I read the poem?
Exactly.
Thank you very much. And so what about the matter of there being very few fine art references to your work by various writers?
Well, I think that what you say is true, but I really appreciate your perception of surrealist influences.
Not even surrealism. Don't you see Miro in there? Don't you see Tingley in there? Yeah,
definitely. And Giacometti that you referred to in our forthcoming book. Right. No, those are definitely strong influences. And actually, Wayne Custenbaum referred to surrealism in my digital collages. Again, to plug our forthcoming book, More Fugitive Than Light. It's a body of poems written by Richard from 2016 to 2017, accompanied by digital collages. But definitely, there's a surreal dimension to the works that are definitely grounded in art history as well.
Carter, did you want to jump in? Because I'll just keep talking all night.
It's a really interesting point you made about the way writers don't connect Daniel's work to precedents, and I'm just wondering why that is, because as you say, they do seem to be descendants in a certain way of certain surrealist work, and I don't know why exactly that would be. It might be excuse me. It might be in part because we so often see Daniel's work apart from a fine art setting. You see it in the landscape, and we make connections with the landscape, and as you do with the cosmos, and so that might have something to do with it.
And that's a good thing. And that's a good thing, right, Carter? Don't you think that's a good thing to expand the field, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because everything has. All works of art have a heritage. They're the product of a lineage, and it's good to know and to be conscious of that lineage, which it should be mentioned more often. But the other point would be that his works are so distinctive that the first thing. Seeing connections with earlier work is not the first thing that comes to mind because they are so distinctive, and they seem to be. And there's a variety. There are various strains of Daniel's work. There are the works that have glass. There are the works that are almost figurative. There are the works that are more voluminous, and so on. But they all have this kind of. They have a family resemblance that's strong, and perhaps that blocks our imaginations in thinking of their other family resemblances to work by other artists. But there's definitely a connection, because there always is. I mean, any artist has progenitors, in a sense. And the thing that we hope for is what we get in Daniel's case, is that those early exemplars get utterly transformed into something that's
Which,
distinctively his.
which again is a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's what we look for. We want to see, we want to see something that stands on its own and is what it is on its own terms. And that Daniel has so often associated his work with water and been so willing to get out into the world with it is, I think, another exemplary thing. Not to always depend on the white walled gallery space.
Exactly. I have a question for you, and it will put my mind at ease in the future. What exactly does collaboration represent to you? Because it's almost like throughout your work, throughout the history of your work, you love implicating people. I say that in relationship to myself because I'm wicked. But you like to work with people. I mean, and I want to know what collaboration means to you. And I want to just put that in a slightly other context. Artists strive in the art world to carve out their place, and they place so much emphasis on their individuality. And I mean, Carter's just referring to this right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. You have to find, as Joy always says, you can always tell a great artist you could just, they have a language. You immediately know what that language is, and then you go, you know what a Miro is as opposed to Henri Matisse. So there's an emphasis in the art world always on individuality or individuation, which is another thing altogether. So, but in your case, the works are two things at the same time. They're inscrutable because you yourself have a type. You call it inscrutable theologies. I think you did a lecture or a talk or some such thing.
An installation in Germany.
Right, and so there's an inscrutability to the work, which is very individual, as Carter's saying. I mean, I don't even know if you're striving for it. You sort of seem to come to it naturally, which makes you all that much more charming. And at the same time, you seek out collaboration. So the two things seems to be antithetical, but they seem to be perfectly balanced in who and what you represent.
That's very interesting. Well, thank you for. And in fact,
it's not meant as a compliment.
No, but I remember that you and I, Richard and I met through Enrico Pedrini, an Italian art theorist, and I invited Richard to participate in this book I was working on at the time, The Story of the Phoenix, which involved transforming one of my digital collages in some way through a kind of figurative death and rebirth. And I think that I'm a very introverted person. In a way, art has been a way of connecting to others. And from that project, the Story of the Phoenix, I began working on an ongoing conceptual project called Meditation Mediation. I had created a series of 12 vessel sculptures and invited artists and poets and writers to collaborate with me in a manner of their own choosing by filling those vessels with some kind of temporary meaning. And that went on for many years. And I really enjoyed seeing how people, also the idea of kind of the concave space of art. I did one with Achille Bonito-Oliva, the Italian curator, and he meditated specifically on the concave spaces of art, allowing your work to be filled from elsewhere. And so for me, that collaboration is a wonderful opportunity to develop work and dialogue, through unexpected interventions by other creative people. So that's something that's very important in my work, definitely.
Carter, did you want to add something to that?
Well, as both of you talk about this subject of collaboration, it occurs to me that in the basic art situation, there's a work of art and somebody's viewing it. And the viewer, one hopes, finds some sort of meaning in it. And that is a kind of collaboration. It occurs to me that, as you said, that Daniel invites more formal or more elaborate forms of collaboration, that he's sort of bringing out into the open the basic art experience and expanding on it and giving it more dimensions, which I hadn't thought of. But I mean, that's absolutely true, I think, in Daniel's case. And Daniel, I should say too, is extremely generous. There have been a number of readings up here in the Hudson Valley um, that he's videotaped, readings of mine that he's videotaped. In fact, there's kind of a small archive of of videotapes of I think of them as the Rothbart readings, because he's videotaped them all and they're all there. And that too is a kind of collaboration. So I think, you know, it's true. Our notion of the artist really emphasizes, probably overemphasizes, the idea of individuality, and lurking behind that idea, just sort of raw, sheer, grasping ego. But that Daniel has come to terms with that in a way that's been very, very productive and inviting these richer forms of collaboration.
You know, Carter, that was the reason why I try to hire people to read my poetry, because I think there's no reflection on you. You're a fine reader. I have a terrible voice, so I always think, wouldn't my poems sound so much better if somebody else read them, and preferably women?
Well, I know what you mean. I'm never crazy about hearing the playback of my own readings, but that may just be like, I don't know, seeing photographs of oneself or something. You know, they're never quite what one wants.
So talking about collaboration, I think you guys in the audience have sort of, you need to collaborate with us now. If we can have a little bit of a Q&A, and if we accept all kinds of questions, real ones and make-believe ones. Any kind of questions you have, or any statements you want to make.
Sure. And I was thinking about, the kind of biological aspect of your work, Daniel, and sort of the universal shapes, and some of them are kind of sci-fi, I think, as well. A little bit sci-fi, a little bit they're kind of like they've got a kind of UFO quality to them. And I was wondering, you were talking about the Japanese, these Japanese fishing balls that they wash up on the shore. But when you're thinking about these shapes, are you like, you have these tendril qualities, and then they have this sort of these links, these long links. Are you thinking about them like how they're interconnected with one another? Are they like talking to each other? Or are they having like, obviously they are to some degree, but are you thinking about that when you place them and how you place them in the space, or, in your specific locations, I guess? Anyway, I'm saying a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, they do, they become constellations of, of forms that definitely interact with one another, and some of them are definitely, inspired by growth forms in nature, and I grew up on the west coast of the United States, and so forests were always close by, and I became very interested, while living in Italy, I became particularly kind of interested in Jewish mysticism and the tree of life and of the divine Sephiroth and such. So I don't know.
They have a cosmology, so there's like sort of as above, so below.
That's right. That's definitely true. Yeah. Even in the way that certain sculptures employ counterweights to lift elements out of the water. There's definitely an element of balance in those pieces.
Anybody? Yes.
So you mentioned.
Could you be a little louder, please?
About the glass balls that would wash up on the shore in Oregon having Japanese air. Like, how do you think about air now, and then also like Duchamp's use of his bottled air as well?
That's good.
Talk about air a little bit more in the context of your work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love the idea of those Japanese fishing floats are Duchampian. I mean, they're like the air of Paris that, you know, those files that Duchamp created, you know, as multiples to the idea of that. Actually, it's Madar Sheffi, the curator of this installation in Israel. Yesterday, we had a discussion of ecology and the arts at White Box, and she was saying that in a way you're taking this air from Japan and putting it in you know in Israel in this kind of womb, you know, beneath the. So it's true. I mean, I think a lot of it is you know. Is about the things that really unite us and as a species, the, you know, water and air and the life-giving elements that are absolutely necessary for, you know, for life and also for you know, people to live together, you know, peaceful and finding common ground in those things.
So Daniel, there's anything that irritates me about you is that you don't really address evil. You know, and sort of the darkness at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. As a kind of secular Buddhist, you don't really, you know, how do you deal with that? Yeah. Okay, Carter, did you want to jump in? Did you want to jump in by any chance?
Actually, no, I couldn't hear the question, so
The one thing that never seems to appear in Daniel's work is even the suggestion of a kind of malevolent world, which is all I see. And I was wondering why Daniel doesn't see malevolence so much. It's not in there. Or do you? Or what do you think? Because I think it's actually an interesting dimension. Is it a missing dimension of Daniel's work, or is it there?
You know that I hadn't really thought of that, but it's true. His work seemed to have the presence of living things that are simply flourishing on their own terms. I don't see any predatory forms in his work, and I don't see any predatory forms in his work, and I don't until now I hadn't thought of them possibly being subject to any sort of predation, but no doubt everything is ultimately. But there seems to be a vision of do you know that 19th century American painter Edward Hicks with his images of a peaceable kingdom where the lion is lying down and the lamb and all the other species are there? It occurs to me that Daniel's work proposes a kind of peaceable kingdom in which all of these forms, which all feel like living forms, are all getting along together somehow. And that's part of his vision. I mean, there are, you know, if I racked my brains, I could probably think of some surrealists who present a very kind of Hobbesian world, violent state of nature, and so on. But it seems to me that Daniel's sensibility is very, very far from that, and it's more, it's just implicitly. It's not a theme exactly in this work, but it's implicitly there. They just have that feel to them.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I was just thinking that in terms of Jewish influences on my work, for several years I was reading Gershom Scholem on the Kabbalah, and according to this Luraic creation story, the universe was conceived out of this catastrophe where divine light was poured into vessels, and some of them couldn't shattered. And there's this whole idea of the light being commingled with darkness, and that in a way the duty of any righteous person is to return those sparks to their fountainhead, but it's interesting. I mean, I also thought of it in postmodern terms, this kind of decentering of the light, and the idea that you could find light in very unexpected places.
You're so clever. You got out of that so well. Are you kind of signaling we should shut down, or what? No? Yes. No. Gentleman up there. What?
Sort of.
Yeah. So how much time do we have left? Wrap up. Okay, so let's do one more question. Anybody? Okay, that gentleman.
What do you think, Daniel, about your floating and this historical situation?
Yeah. Good question.
What do you think about what you're doing with the floating sculptures?
Yes.
In this kind of historical situation.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, I mean, it's very interesting. That space in Israel, it was it was a space that was created by an Arab culture, the Umayyad. In fact, it was also a capital of their caliphate. Ramle was the capital. I think it was the only city actually built by Arabs. In Israel as a capital city. The space, though, is not a religious space. It's a secular space. And definitely, I think that adds an element of, well, let me say something about Ramle also, the town. It's one of the mixed cities in Israel, so it has a substantial Arab population. About 20% of the citizens of Ramle are Arabs. And we definitely wanted an Arab voice in the project. And Marwa read this beautiful, really moving poem by a Palestinian Arab poet to a cloud, Rashid Hussein. So I think it's it's about coming together and again finding common ground through this place where people. Water, this underground water, it also has a mythic quality, and different cultures and different people have different kind of stories too, and narratives around water. So bringing people together, I think, was the.
So we should end with Carter Ratcliff's comment about a peaceful kingdom.
A peaceful kingdom.
No way. Okay. So that's it, guys. Thanks, Carter.
Thank you.
Thank you.